Hello and welcome to the Give Me the Remote podcast. It's episode 51 on the 8th of October 2019. My name's Sheridan and I'm joined in the pod by
John, and that is a perfect introduction, Sheridan. As finally 51 episodes in, you have nailed it.
I might be slow, but I get there in the end.
51 tries.
To be fair, I didn't do the intro on all 51 episodes.
Sure, what do we talk about first?
Let's talk about all the money in the world.
Okay, now, we might have actually talked about this a while ago, but you hadn't seen it, and it took me forever to get you to see it. And then you were like, oh my god, I love this movie. And then I was like, let's review it for this podcast. And you were like, what movie is that? I don't remember it again.
Well, you confused me.
I said JP Morgan, not JP Getty. Yes,
So
shall we tell people what it's about?
Yes.
You used to be a spy. My child is a prisoner.
$17 million. All they will take is eye, his ear, the hand, and don't tell me you don't have the money.
It's the story of John Paul Getty's grandson who gets kidnapped while in Italy, and basically Getty is such a tight ass that he doesn't want to release the ransom money, and so his family and his ex-CIA agent, I don't know, lackey, has to try and convince him to give the money and or rescue said grandson. Based on true events. Highly dramatised.
Highly dramatised, yeah. It's one of those ones, though, which I like in this day and age. You can watch the movie, you can thoroughly enjoy it, and then you can pull out the iPad and start Wikipediaing what actually happened.
Apparently John Paul Getty being a tight ass, though, is factually accurate.
Yeah, I mean, they show in the film that he had a payphone installed in his English estate so that visitors could make phone calls without using his phone.
And this guy was worth $2 billion in, 1960, which was a lot of money.
By some measures, he was the wealthiest person who ever lived, and adjusting for inflation and everything else. And that was mostly oil money.
Yes.
From figuring out how to get the Saudi oil to the rest of the world, which is a really interesting geopolitical story that a lot of people don't
It's
understand.
kind of a little bit of a subplot going on because the kidnapping in this film occurs at the same time as the as a price drop in oil, and there's some sort of implications that the grandson framed his kidnapping with some involvement from some Saudis.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of, and JP Getty's paranoia, particularly in his dotage, this was set literally in the last days of his life.
Played really well by Christopher Plummer.
Who was parachuted in at beyond the last minute to reshoot the scenes.
Oh, because this was
Kevin Spacey.
The Kevin Spacey one. I forgot
I'd
about
quite
that.
like to see the Kevin Spacey version one day, you know.
I don't know. I think Plummer had a certain level of sort of crazy billionaire.
Plummer did it very well, absolutely.
Also starring Michelle Williams as the daughter-in-law, so the mother of the...
Now, she's a woman who... She copped a lot of crap, didn't she?
What do you mean?
Well, first she marries this louche billionaire's son who turns out to be a complete waste of space.
Oh, you mean in the film? I thought you
Yeah.
were talking about in real life.
No, I'm just talking about... Well, I mean,
She doesn't have the...
it's based on a real woman, you know.
I felt she played it a little bit too... Hello, boys. What do you need to do to get a drink around here?
Right.
You didn't think that was a bit too much of that kind of...
I'm not really discussing the acting now as much as the real human being's life, where she sort of, you know, tried to start a family with this complete drug-addled dropkick.
Oh, yeah. And then she's got this rich father-in-law who's just a complete...
Well, he's constantly trying to win games with her, but he's got all the money and all the lawyers.
Yeah. And she's like, I just want my kid back.
Yeah, but he's using her children as tokens to win his game, and it's nasty, and they show that. And she has a very tough time of it, particularly because when you're JP Getty's daughter-in-law, people expect you to have some money and to pay your way.
Yeah, and they were living quite the sort of...
impecuniously.
Yeah, they were. Mark Wahlberg plays an ex-CIA agent who's hired as kind of like a... What would you call him? Like a bodyguard? Advanced bodyguard.
Yeah, security man. Yeah, private security man.
You know, nothing to report back there. It was just Mark Wahlberg. But, you know,
I thought it was,
Competent for the role.
yeah, I thought it was creditable. Did make me look up the character, who is quite a shadowy dude who probably was pretty upset.
And who, yeah, I guess it was a real person. I mean, obviously exaggerated and whatnot, but there was actually a person of the vague description of this kind in the real life story.
Yeah.
I thought it was played. What I liked about this role was its mix of history, obviously exaggerated and sensationalized, but that's what you want sometimes. Action. There was a lot of all of the supporting cast were pretty decent.
Yeah, I thought the Italian kidnappers were played very well.
Yes.
To bring some humanity to what could have been a very two-dimensional place.
Yes.
Yeah.
Nice pacing, some nice Italian scenery.
I thought it was a little drawn out in some of the... It depends really where you think the story is. Do you think the story is in the kidnapped teenager?
I thought the best scenes were with Getty, myself.
Yeah, with Getty, with Chase, with the mother, I thought that those were the better scenes. Partly because the kidnap scenes were very uncomfortable. Because...
Yeah.
It was unpleasant.
I mean, when he gets his ear sliced off, which did happen in real life, and
Yeah.
apparently they've posted it, and it took 3 weeks to get to him because of a postal strike in Italy. So I imagine that ear was pretty stinky.
Yeah, hopefully they pickled it before they sent it. I don't know.
But that was pretty brutal. But no, I liked because I mean, and this is actually true to the real life stories. You just can't imagine someone with that much money just not paying that small amount, in the scheme of things, to rescue his grandson.
Yes and no. He did make the point that he had something like 14 grandchildren, and if he started paying...
But he was so awful about it.
If he started paying public ransoms, he was endangering those other grandchildren.
But he was so awful about it.
And he also strongly suspected, with very good reason, that the grandchild had been plotting to conspire to get himself
Which he hadn't.
kidnapped. No, he had been plotting.
But
He'd just been kidnapped by different people.
Yeah. His own plot was nowhere near as advanced as the actual plot.
But given those things, I mean, John Paul Getty was probably not a great human being to begin with, and getting all the money in the world did not improve him as a human being. And that's shown at some length throughout this. And it'll probably be spoilery, but the twist at the ending does sort of it's a jaw-dropping moment. And it's pretty good.
Yeah. What are you going to give it?
4 stars?
Yeah, I'm going to go 4 stars too.
Okay, then.
What's next?
Tolkien.
Tell me a story. In any language you want.
It's about journeys. The journeys we take to prove ourselves. It's about adventures.
We should form a club, a brotherhood.
We change the world through the power of art.
Music, poetry.
And what about Tolkien?
I want to write something.
It's about magic beyond anything anyone has ever felt before.
The movie.
The movie. Tolkien the movie. Which has almost no dwarves in it whatsoever.
I don't think it has any dwarves in it.
It does, kind of.
No, I don't think you see any in there.
It does have a Dark Lord.
It does.
When he's hallucinating on the battlefield.
So, tells the story of J.R.R. Tolkien's early life. So
let's take that back a step. The author who wrote Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, although the Hobbit movie was awful. Well, movies were awful. But that wasn't Tolkien's fault.
That was not.
One book, one movie. Yes, but so anyway, best-selling, award-winning, father of the whole fantasy genre as we know it.
Professor of linguistics.
Professor of linguistics.
At Oxford, not just, any old school. No Southern Cross Uni for him.
Yes, and it is interesting seeing his life of sort of a guarded poverty. In
I
that,
was thinking about this the other day, though, and this is sort of a bit of an example of how. I mean, this is probably getting a little bit too into politics and social issues,
this
but
whole movie's about politics and social issues.
you know, there used to be, if you were born to a certain level of standing, which Tolkien was, and I'm not saying I mean, there's problems already there with just even that statement, but if you were a kid and your parents died, the network, the social network, would sort of pick you up and look after you to a bit of to some extent,
Yeah, to some extent.
without the government or.
But the fact he was extremely gifted helped him get scholarships. And
True.
if he hadn't been super gifted, then he probably would have had a job and a wife and lived a reasonably happy life in Birmingham. So, yeah, but, you know, it was the classic tale of empire in that his parents had gone out to South Africa to try and better themselves and up their social standing, and things had gone wrong, and the father had died, and the mother didn't live much longer after they returned to England, leaving, children who... And they showed some nice touches of the mother entertaining the children with Icelandic sagas, which obviously inspired Tolkien.
Well, apparently
fantasy.
she's credited as being a massive influence on him because she taught him the rudimentary Latin and things, and that was kind of where the love of languages had started.
Yeah. But, yes, then she dies reasonably early in the film, and he's entrusted to the care of a priest who comes across as a pretty good guy, I think, in this.
Apparently in real life, that he was and remained to be like one of the closest people in Tolkien's life.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes, obviously, he was a bit stern or disappointed in young Tolkien, but I think anyone charged with raising a young man is going to have to be stern at times and disappointed at times. That's just life and young people. In fact, old people can be extremely disappointing at times as well, but they have to look after themselves. It's definitely a study of the era. It highlights quite well the pressure on young Tolkien to maintain his marks so he can keep a scholarship, because he doesn't get to repeat a semester.
He is maintaining a scholarship though at Oxford University.
Yeah, and it does
even back then.
It does really show a human side that, with courses that he wasn't actually that interested in, he didn't do very well.
No, yeah. But it probably ends when he's about 30, so it ends before he has written.
Well, it literally ends with him having probably finished The Hobbit and starting to test it out on children. Yeah.
So probably worthy of noting that the Tolkien estate has issued a statement saying that they do not endorse this film in any way. Mm-hmm. They don't believe it's a realistic portrayal of Tolkien.
Look, I wouldn't take it that either way. The Tolkien estate is unbelievably
notorious,
precious.
Yeah.
Unbelievably precious and often counterproductive to the interests of his memory.
So I guess it kind of follows... Yeah, so it follows him at university, his time in World War One, and then after he's married and had children and starting to work on writing The Hobbit.
Yeah,
it's not a full depiction of his life.
Although Tolkien 2, where they go through the publishing of the Lord of the Rings, is going to be great. I'm really looking forward to that.
And I guess the primary story is really about his boyhood circle of friends.
Yeah.
Who they were real. They formed a sort of brotherhood while they were at boarding school, continued on to go to Oxford, and half of them died in the war.
Oxford and Cambridge.
And yeah.
But it's important to remember Oxford and Cambridge are not very far apart as well. I do like the old saying that Cambridge makes martyrs and Oxford burns them.
But essentially it's a story, I guess, about young male friendship.
Yeah, of a pretty... I mean, yes, there are women around, and sometimes... and
I guess the story of him meeting his wife.
Yeah, although I feel like that's kind of secondary to the band of brothers.
The two main actors who are in this film are Nicholas Hoult, who's the boy from About a Boy, and doesn't that just make you feel old?
Yeah, but that kid was always going to grow up and play Tolkien, wasn't he?
Nicholas Hoult. He's also in Skins, which, we all had a chance to feel old then. And Lily Collins plays the wife, Edith. I found her, to be honest, to be somewhat tedious.
She had some good lines.
Now,
I mean, she did take a crack at him for why there are no women in your stories, which is the classic criticism of Tolkien.
yeah. And, to be fair, her lot in life would have been pretty rubbish. So to actually portray her as, she could have been portrayed with much less dimension than what she was.
Oh, her lot in life, though, she did pretty well considering she was...
But it still was much...
She was an orphan, that could have gone way worse.
But, they effectively were in the same circumstance. She was an orphan in the same house as he was. And she didn't have any opportunity for education or external stimulus. And which I guess is...
Which she did talk about in the...
I know, and actually in some ways I'm like, well, that actually might be more of an interesting story to me. But of course...
Well, she didn't write The Lord of the Rings,
She
did
didn't.
she?
But the reason she didn't was because the societal structures in
hang
place
on.
didn't provide her with the situations where she was able to write.
Look, only one person's written The Lord of the Rings.
I'm just saying, we could have had something
I don't think it's a given that she could have written The Lord of the Rings.
I didn't say it was a given, but I'm just saying that it was an example of the social structures of society that prevented women from actually being able to do things like write Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
She didn't have an opportunity to go to school. She didn't have an opportunity to sit around with her friends talking about poetry and music
you
or
had
writing.
The Brontes and the Austens in the
but
the
they
previous
were
upper class.
they were lucky to have had that happen to them because the structure of the world certainly didn't allow that to happen. That was just luck and talent. But I'm just saying you can't use those as an example of why there weren't more great women writers. There's a whole lot of feminism written about this very issue.
I appreciate and understand that feminism, but there's still... Tolkien was a singular talent. It's not like talking about
Yeah, I'm not disputing that.
That's not talking about a whole generation of young boy writers, which certainly there were plenty of in that post-war period, who probably had more than a leg up on account of being male. Siegfried Sassoon is a bit mediocre if you ask me, but
yeah, I think we're talking cross purposes, but anyway.
Sure.
So I think probably the issue with this film is it's a little bit slow and boring.
I feel it just is what it is. It's a story of an era, of a time. It's a story about 4 young men coming of age, trying to steal each other's girlfriends.
It's not particularly...
Occasionally punching each other.
Yeah, but you know what? Even then, it was a bit meh, the way they did it. They sort of had one crack, and then they got put back in their box, and they didn't go again. It wasn't very exciting.
That's how chaps comport themselves.
It just was a bit, I guess they were all just dweeby, goody Oxford.
Yeah, I thought the World War One stuff
boys.
was a bit confusing, but it was kind of designed to be.
I think the World War One stuff was highly exaggerated and not at all factually accurate.
Everything was pretty close to period.
I don't think he was going out there on the battlefield trying to find his friend and seeing him in the distance on the front line.
Yeah, I wouldn't... He might have thought he was, though. There's a question between... Because he was in a high delirium and shell shock. So his recollection of events definitely would have little comparison to reality, but his recollection would still be valid as his recollection.
True. I don't know if that happened, though.
There
was definitely a lot, though, of inference, which is probably why the Tolkien estate is annoyed. There was a lot of influence that these events that are depicted in the movie, so the friendship group, him going to war, were the building blocks of The Hobbit, in particular, but also, I guess, Lord of the Rings. And I think that the Tolkien estate would probably be saying, well, it's actually a little bit more complicated than that. You can't really simplify it down to that.
Yeah, look, certainly Tolkien himself wrote emphatically that it wasn't an allegory. But just because he doesn't think it's an allegory doesn't make it so, because the artist doesn't have the final say into how their work is interpreted. There was also, though, no doubt that, and there's a significant body of scholarly work, probably more than any work of fiction deserves, into the influences of the First World War on Tolkien's worldview of a declining state of grace in the world, and the world descending into industrial darkness, which you can definitely feel those themes throughout all of his books.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely when you watch this film, it's hard not to see all of
They hit
these
you over the head with a
events.
hammer about it, but it's very it's a lively discussion out there.
Yeah, but I guess there's such complex works that sort of oversimplifying it in this way was a little bit condescending to, I guess, the audience that would primarily be interested in Tolkien.
But I also think that if someone has lived through the Battle of the Somme, and then they write about the Pelennor Fields and Dagor Bragollach and things like that, you're going to assume that their lived experience on the nightmarish Western Front in World War One has contributed to their writing about similar scenes in their fiction.
Yeah, and one of the better parts of this film is those battlefield depictions. They're very, very dramatic and like very surreal in many ways. And there's all this kind of, descent into delusion, and they're visually it's a very, very appealing part of the film.
Yeah, and definitely the most kinetic part of the film as well. Because otherwise it's mostly just him sitting around drunk in quadrangles while professors overhear him through windows and things like that.
Yes.
Which doesn't make for great drama if you didn't know. If it hadn't been for the fact that he wrote the biggest selling book in human history.
Like, why do I care about this stupid little prat that's like actually had it pretty good in life given his circumstance?
Yeah. Anywho, I still enjoyed the film.
Yeah, I enjoyed it too.
Probably a 3.5 from me, I guess.
Yeah, I think I'll have to go 3. If I was doing halves, I'd be on 3.5.
Yeah. But look, if you are a fan of Tolkien,
I think it's well worth a look. It's actually quite a reasonably good film for the family, probably. It's not really any sex.
A lot of things you're going to have to explain to kids, though.
Like what?
Just the period stuff.
Oh, not like teenagers.
Yeah.
I guess they're not going to want to watch that.
Oh, if they're big Lord of the Rings fans, they will.
Mm.
Cool. So what's next?
Well, it's not really one thing, and they're not alike. It's 2 things, and they're old and not alike. Well, I guess they are alike in that they're comedies. So recently on Netflix, they've been promoting pretty hard Peep Show, which for those who haven't watched it is a British, I think, Channel 4 comedy.
Yep, let's keep going with the setup. Yeah.
And South Park.
Yes.
So available in all their episodes. So you can watch.
South Park's complicated.
Oh, actually, right.
South Park's season 1, and then a best of to take you through the highlights of South Park up until about season 18, and then I think another 6 seasons.
Yes. I keep forgetting it goes for 18 seasons. It's crazy.
But what we're seeing is Netflix have long known but rarely admitted that most of their viewing is made up of people watching long-running serials. In particular, watching The Office and Friends.
Which look, until you pointed it out to me, or until you mentioned that, I would have said, nah, definitely not. But you kind of do it without realising you're doing it.
Mm-hmm.
So if you get to, I don't know, you've watched a movie or you've come home from work and you've had dinner and it's 9:30, your brain's a bit fried.
You don't want anything new.
You don't want anything new. You want a little blankie and a bottle of wine. And you go, what do I want to watch? And you go, Office, Peep Show, Spaced is one of my all-time favourites. Broad City is another one that I'll put on.
Yeah, Broad City and Spaced don't have the length.
No.
Though. And anyway, they've lost Friends and The Office, which I think made up... It was a huge percentage of total Netflix views.
Was it the US Office they lost? Or?
I think they lost both of them.
Yeah, right.
And what they've very cleverly done is said to themselves, what else are long-running shows that have devoted fan bases? And certainly on what they're showing us in our algorithmic feeds, they've come up with South Park and Peep Show, and to an extent Teachers. Teachers, I feel, is just a little too old. It doesn't feel modern enough.
You know what they need to get on there?
Mm-hmm.
Sex and the City.
I would imagine they're working on that. Yeah,
Because
I think the rights to Sex and the City are pretty closely held, though.
Weirdly, I mean, that is one show, and actually, when you
It's
rewatch,
dated poorly, though.
when you rewatch that, it has dated so poorly. It's form, and I mean, it was revolutionary from a perspective at the time of, you know, feminist and sexual empowerment for women. But you look at it now, and it is really, really wrong. Anyway, that's, I guess, a whole different show.
Mm-hmm.
But that's one that is on 10 Access, and so if I'm going to bed, it's actually on free to air. I'll often watch it through free to air.
Okay.
But again, because it's comforting and nostalgic, I guess is what it is.
So let's talk about Peep Show first.
I think I need to do a poo.
You're not pooing in this bunker. If you poo in the bunker, I will shoot you.
No! Oh!
I love you, Senior. So great for a first date. What is my fantasy? It's basically just humping. I love humping.
Right.
You're a sexual pervert, Jeremy.
You mean in a bad way? Let's just hunker down and veg out.
Which is interesting. In Australia, it first started getting shown on ABC2, which is still a bit of a ghetto that no one watches. And 10 years ago, when they first started showing it, was way more of a ghetto that no one watches. And it's a weird one in that it ages beautifully because it's just two dudes living in a crappy apartment hating each other.
Yeah, so David Mitchell and Robert Webb. Olivia Colman's in it, and hasn't she just gone on to do some amazing things since this show?
Yeah, but she's very much playing herself in this as well.
It's a little bit. I think it's male dominated, but the female characters in it have never really been given the short stick. There's always a sympathy there as a woman when you watch those women being tried to chat it up or in a relationship with one of these.
I think Big Suze and Dobby are pretty good characters, and they've got a lot of agency. In fact,
that's what I mean.
They basically don't answer their boys' phone calls, and they're off living their own lives and just periodically intersecting with the guys because the guys are so hopeless.
Yeah, and they're all quite different. They're not a cookie cutter mold of a woman that's a agent in these male lives. Like they're unique personalities.
Yeah, in fact, an ongoing recurring theme is that these women are living their own lives and the guys mean very little to them.
Yeah, I mean, Sophie puts up with an enormous amount of crap from Mark. Yeah. Absolute colossal amount of crap.
Now, Mitchell and Webb are an interesting pair in that they work together and write together and have been in quite a succession of shows together. So they obviously really like working with each other. And I've got to say, David Mitchell, a bit like the way Ricky Gervais playing David Brent made me uncomfortable because I see a lot of myself in that character.
You are that dude.
Thanks, babe. Sorry, are you saying I'm David Brent in The Office, or are you saying...
No, you're Mark from Peep Show.
Yes.
You're not David Brent. You're not quite there.
For really?
Well, he's awful.
Oh, okay. Right. Thanks. Wasn't sure which way that was going. But I mean, Jez is entirely relatable, and I think anyone who's lived a life well lived has known quite a few Jez's.
I think anyone who's lived a life well lived has known quite a few super hands.
Yeah, and super hands, which still remains a bone of contention whether his name is Hans or Hans. But Super Hans speaks a lot of real truth from time to time, you know?
He does.
That's how you get Nazis! And nothing ever changes. You can drop in season 2, you can drop in season 7, and nothing changes in their lives. It's almost perfect soap in that regard.
Yeah, I think it's actually one of those. It's so relatable to us because we are exactly in the age when this is like the dynamic of the social circumstance our generation finds ourselves in. That, you know, you stay single for longer. You're forced to cohabitate with people while you're well into adulthood. Not all the time, but a lot of the time, or you know people that are. You suffer from trying to find meaningful connection with another person, to like in a relationship. And your job sucks.
Yeah.
Like all of our jobs now are just we're all just sitting behind a computer.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, it's a really relatable, accurate commentary on being an adult.
In 2019, or when they made this,
or when they made
ago?
the show, like
Yeah.
it was, and
But
you hadn't really
in modernity, everyone's got phones and email, and
and you hadn't really seen. I hadn't seen that kind of portrayal before.
The other thing is, it's got a really interesting camera style where almost all shots, not every shot, but almost all shots are from a character's point of view.
Yeah.
And they do a really quite weird thing where you'll hear, so it's shot from a point of view, you're hearing the words coming out of the other character's mouth while they talk. So you're looking at one character as if you are the other character. And then you've got an interior monologue overlaid on top of what the person's saying as they address.
Yeah. And
they'll switch those roles around a lot, but I can't recall a show that has done that as consistently and certainly made it work.
Yeah.
It's quite unusual, and yet it feels absolutely natural when you watch it. You can watch quite a few episodes before you even realise that's the thing they're doing.
True.
So
criticism obviously is very white and very male.
Yeah.
Even accounting for our comments earlier about the female characters, this is definitely a dude's show from a dude's perspective.
Yeah, it's written about two dudes. Yeah. There are quite a lot of characters of colour in it, though.
Well, Alan.
Yeah.
He's the only one.
There's some Pakistani people.
They're not fully formed, though. Look,
Okay.
I'm not saying everything needs to...
No, but particularly because it's set in modern London, it is unusually white, I would go so far as to say. Yeah. Although Mitchell and Webb, I guess...
They're white. I mean, they are white dudes. I'm not saying that we have to stop making these shows, but, you know, we've made a lot of them.
Yeah. Yeah, and it might be the end of an era in that
Well,
regard.
and actually, you know what? You probably wouldn't get this show made today.
Yeah.
Because when this would have been made, when did it start? Probably 10 years ago.
It started 12 years ago, 15 years ago, something like that.
2003, yeah. So yeah, there's a favourite on the Netflix. And South Park, I actually think what they've done with South Park is probably, I think we're going to see a lot more of this.
I would like 500 AK-47s, please. You don't know me. Ginger people do have swords, right?
So this compiling of the best of, I mean, maybe it doesn't really work. Actually, you know what? I wouldn't mind having a compiled best of Peep Show.
It could certainly work, although it's fine just to crunch through all the episodes slowly.
Whereas
I'd love to know what there's been some legal distinction drawn in South Park's contracts where they can do a best of the middle years without showing them all, and I'd love to know the exact ins and outs of it, but we just don't know. But there it is. So you've got season 1, the middle years, and then the modern era. And I would say modern era South Park is something that too many people have written off South Park as that show they watched 20 years ago, and don't watch modern era South Park, which is white hot.
Well, middle era South Park though got pretty grim
and hit and miss.
But yeah, modern South Park's very political, very biting satire.
And screamingly funny the way they do it as well. But even with this trip down memory lane we've been doing, watching the best of, South Park have been on the right side of history on so many issues that people didn't even think were issues at the time.
Yeah, it was quite interesting. And there's quite sort of... Because South Park, there's so many episodes. I mean, how many episodes do they do a year? They
22,
yeah.
Something like that. Yeah.
So they're like really reacting to like events of the week. And so there's things in there and events that you wouldn't remember today. But, you know, they were really in the news cycle when they were doing it. And it's actually quite interesting.
The other interesting thing with South Park, I find, is the multi-layered metaphors are really quite something. Like, Imagination Land, the terrorists are attacking our imaginations. We have to nuke our imaginations. It's meta on meta on meta, a lot of the stuff they do. And then they've just got exploding dog turds and kids calling each other dicks. And,
I don't understand how Mr. Hanky the Christmas Poo doesn't make it into the best of.
I do wonder if the rights to Mr. Hanky don't reside elsewhere. In fact,
Because there are quite a few episodes like that I felt were missing.
We didn't watch the season 1, which was when Mr. Hanky made his stunning debut, though. So that is there. We just haven't watched it.
But they still have a best of series.
Yeah, but the best of is covering a set of seasons that's not in.
Oh, so it's not a best of the whole...
No.
Oh, it's just the best of the seasons they're missing.
Yeah.
Oh, see, I don't like that. It's not as cool as I thought it was.
Well, I'm sorry,
Well,
Sharon.
because what I think would actually work really well with these long form shows is a curated best of episodes.
Mm.
Because, like, if I could watch a best of Friends or a best of Sex and the City, I'd just pop that on.
Okay, well, I hope Netflix is listening and taking on.
I mean,
board
that just seems like a no-brainer to me.
Well, except they want to drive you into longer viewing hours, not fewer viewing hours.
But maybe it might get me into more. Turn me on to South Park again.
Maybe.
Give me a little taster. Get me back in.
Yeah. I do find with the best of South Park that what they tend to have chosen was the most artistically striking or memorable episodes, which I've often found to be some of the least enjoyable episodes to watch. Like the one where the kids all pretend they're ninjas and it's shot.
Oh, I like that one.
Partly in an anime style, and Butters is running around. Everyone thinks he's a dog, and he's got a throwing star in his eye.
I like that.
Yeah, I don't. But that's fine. That's just matters of personal taste. I found that one tedious at the time. I found it tedious on the second go around. But it has still been quite a wonderful yomp down memory lane.
Mm.
And the writing is clever. The other thing it does is, and it has this in common with Peep Show, is it shows people as they really are. And you don't see that on television very much.
Yeah.
In that, when someone stubs their toenail, they swear, and if their partner makes a stupid comment about their stubbed toenail, they swear even more.
I feel as though their apartment would have been dirtier.
You're talking about Peep Show now?
Mm.
Yeah, although Mark's pretty uptight. Like, the kitchen gets pretty revolting from time to time.
True.
Which, we can relate to.
Yes.
So have you got anything else to say on these shows, Sheridan?
I don't think we should rate them. That's not what this review was about.
Okay, but the point is, Netflix is finding more and more cult shows from the early 2000s, or even late 90s, early 2000s, and is putting them in long form together because they know that that's what we want. We don't want to be discovering new shows every week.
Yes.
So if you haven't watched Peep Show or South Park and you like the stuff we like because you're still listening to this podcast, then there's some easy recommendation wins for you.
Yes.
Cool. Okay. Thanks very much, folks. Send your emails through to gmtrpodcast@gmail.com or like, share, and subscribe through varying social medias. Do please tell your friends to listen to us because without your love and attention, we die like fairies. And on that note, good night.
Thanks, folks.